Welcome into the best in paranormal programming. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. Got a good show for you today, folks. We're going to join Sterling Moon in just a moment. She's got a book out there called Talking to Spirits, a modern medium's practical advice for spirit communication. It's not just your ordinary mediums program today. I promise you, we're going to get into some interesting program and interesting facts about talking to spirits today and some different things that you've never heard before from a spiritual medium and how to make contact with spirits and different kinds of spirits. I was enthralled with this book as I cracked into it this week. And we'll get to that here in just a second. I want to tell you a little bit about a movie I went out and saw last night, Renfield. I know a lot of you are looking forward to seeing Renfield, and I know a lot of you are kind of holding on with bated breath as to what I might have thought of it and what others are thinking of it. I know it looks really good from the trailer. I'm here to tell you, you will not be disappointed. It is a great movie, folks. Renfield, Nicolas Cage and Nicholas Hoult, who plays Renfield. Excellent movie. It's a modern monster tale of Dracula's loyal servant. Nicholas Hoult plays Renfield, of course, the tortured aide of history's most narcissistic boss. Of course, Nicolas Cage playing Dracula, and he plays it to a T, folks. There's a little bit of camp. There's a little bit of comedy. Renfield is forced to procure his master's prey and do his every bidding, no matter how debased it is. And I tell you, it is quite debased. And Renfield tries to neglect Dracula as he goes along. And how should I put it? He woefully does Dracula's bidding. And it's hilarious the entire way. And as it stands, I won't give too much away about the movie, but Renfield is drug into a modern day AA meeting trying to figure out how to get rid of Dracula. But as he tries to get rid of Dracula, he's only drawn in more and more to Dracula's web of deceit. And Dracula tries to figure out how he can take over this world by using Renfield. And as you go deeper and deeper into the movie, it becomes not only more funny, but it also becomes more dangerous. And I got to tip my hat to Nicolas Cage. He's just so good in this movie. And it's been such a long time since we've had such a meaty role for Nicolas Cage. He's really been the master of camp on himself for so long. And this is really such a good role for him. He's really made such a comeback with this movie. Renfield is directed by Chris McKay, who did the Tomorrow War, the Lego Batman movie, and it's from a screenplay by Ryan Ridley and an idea by The Walking Dead and Invincible creator Robert Kirkman. So really, this story is complete in everything that you would want, and it is such a good movie. I can't stress how good this movie is. It's funny, it's got great action, and all around, it's just a great movie. I would say go see it in primetime, not just in matinee, but go see it in primetime. Pay the full price for this thing. It is actually a good movie. You're going to enjoy it, not only just from a supernatural standpoint, but you're going to enjoy it from a comedy standpoint, an action standpoint. It is a good movie. I'll give it 4.5 out of 5 stars. I loved it, and I think you're going to enjoy it as well. So go see Renfield this weekend. It opens Friday at a theater near you. Get your tickets ahead of time, because I have a feeling this thing is going to sell out no matter where you are. Just go see it. Go see it. Renfield. It's at a theater near you this Friday. Let's get into our program now. Our guest today is Sterling Moon. Sterling Moon has a book out there by Llewellyn Press called Talking to Spirits, a modern medium's practical advice for spirit communication. Sterling Moon has communicated with spirits since childhood and began officially practicing mediumship in 2016. She's been reading tarot. We'll ask her how she pronounces it. Some have different pronunciations. Since 1995. And teaching divination skills since 2013. She's the house reader at the Ritual Craft Metaphysical Shop and offers her skills online through her website. She also apprenticed under Johannes Bjorn Gardbach, an internationally respected healer, teacher, and spiritual worker of Swedish folk magic. Let's welcome her in right now to Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show, Sterling Moon. Hi, Sterling. How are you today?
I'm fantastic, although it's going to be hard to want to talk about my book now, because now all I want to talk about is Renfield.
Well, let's get your impression. How did you like Renfield?
Oh my gosh. So I have a friend who hosted an advanced screening last week. Mm-hmm. I laughed until I cried. Yeah. So everyone was dressed up in their, vampire themes. And at one point I had eyeliner just streaming down my cheeks, and it was the gore was fun. It was, everything was so fun about it. But yeah, I laughed until I was just howling. So I think I may have gotten shushed by somebody at one point. I was laughing so hard.
I don't want to downplay Awkwafina's performance either, because she was amazing in it as well.
Oh my gosh, so good. Everyone was so good. So yeah, and I just, you'll also learn some tips about how to deal with any narcissists in your life. So really, there's just an added bonus. That's the part of the movie that had me roaring. The fact that they brought everything into 2023 and it had such an unreasonable, touchy-feely part to it. You know, you never think of Dracula as being the ultimate narcissist, but you know, I mean, that plays into it as well, which is so funny. I mean, that's the part so
that makes
funny.
It, that's the part that puts it over the top, which is just hysterical. Touchy-feely and narcissism. I guess we can kind of lead in with that if you want. And whether that belongs in spirit communication or not, do you find yourself dealing with a lot of narcissists who think they can communicate with spirits? Let's start off with that.
Oh boy, heavy hitting questions right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I mean, it's one of those things where I think more so than narcissism. And okay, there's kind of two camps. There's many different camps of people who believe that they can talk with spirits. And I definitely, the folks that I tend to work best with are people who they have these experiences and they have very, you know, in air quotes, normal lives. And they're having these very abnormal, paranormal experiences. And they start to question, am I okay? What do I do with this? I don't want this, but I can't. The more I try to shut it down, the more it keeps happening. That's what I can relate with. And so those are the people that I tend to gravitate towards. Where I don't get, like, I get a little maybe tired is sometimes folks where it's very like sensationalized and showy. And it's very much about that person. Because for me, I feel like these gifts are very much about creating connections and bringing healing. Some folks would rather make it more about themselves. And it's very much about the drama and the ego and things like that. And, you know, to each their own, everybody's got their own path, but I find that rather tiring sometimes. So I guess that might answer your question a little bit.
It does. Is it pretty easy to discern from someone who's doing it for glory and fame and someone who's really got a genuine gift, who's afraid to open it up?
Sometimes I think it takes a little bit of time because, you know, we live in a very content creation based world. Right. And so sometimes I think there's folks that they might look really good on social media. They might look really good at, you know, the things that they're doing. But sometimes I wonder if for folks who that's where they're spending all of their time and you're not hearing other people, especially because I feel like the folks that are really good about it, you'll hear folks talking about them. They helped me connect with my grandma and holy smokes, this is the thing that happened, or there was something going on in my house and holy smokes, this person helped me to make it so my house feels comfortable again. You know, the proof is usually in the pudding. And if folks have a lot of content that looks really good on the socials, but they don't have a lot of testimonials and people talking about the good work that they're doing, that may indicate a bit of an imbalance there. So that's one of the things that I tend to look for.
I got to wonder too, Sterling. I know we're starting off on a weird point here, but
hey, let's do it. Go for it.
Does spirit deal with someone who has a little bit more ego differently than they do with someone who comes from a genuine place? Do they maybe push a different set of spirit guides towards them, or someone who's communicating with them differently than someone who might be coming from a more genuine spiritual place? So let's say someone who has more ego, maybe a little bit more shallower, maybe is looking to make more money out of the thing, and it doesn't necessarily care about people so much. Are they getting messages more out of ego and spite and maybe aren't connecting with true spirit at that point?
Well, I think that there could be a lot of different things going on. I mean, I think, you know, I don't know what your philosophy is, but I feel like sometimes in my teaching and the way that I work, it's really important to kind of get into a neutral and objective, as neutral and as objective of a space as possible before engaging with any kind of spirit, because then I'm going to be better positioned to hear what's really going on. I think that if maybe you're really full of yourself and you're more kind of like there's a lot of, you know, pomp and ego coming into it, you might have a harder time. You may even create your own spirits You could be attracting, your ego could attract other spirits with ego. And there might be spirits that don't have, I mean, if someone comes to you and they want to talk to their granny who was like from the Midwest and, is very low key, sometimes those can be incredibly difficult spirits to communicate with because they're not so sure about all of this as I'm waving my hands, just kind of emphatically.
I do it too. I talk with my hands as well.
And so granny, Midwestern granny might not want to talk at all with somebody who's like, oh, look at me, I'm so, powerful and all of that. And I think too, there's sometimes those darker, tricksters and things like that, where they find folks like that maybe a little bit of an interesting, little tantalizing treat to latch onto. And, I think there's a lot of, we have to constantly check ourselves in this work in order to stay healthy. And yeah, that's a good question. No one's ever asked me that one before.
Oh, good. All right. We're off and running then. We're off and running.
Yeah.
So there's, let's say the average person who's picking up your book, Talking to Spirits here.
Yes.
Picks up the book and says, well, Sterling, I think I may have an inkling of psychic ability, but I want to expand my horizons. Maybe I want to dip my toe in the water here. Is there such a thing as dipping my toe into the water, or are you in full? Are you jumping into the water when I pick up your book? Is this a thing where once I'm in, I can't go back? Is it like the mafia?
I think it's almost like, kind of where maybe you jump off, you get into like a reservoir or something. I'm in the West. And so like we've got reservoirs, and you never know if that reservoir is going to start off with like a nice little gradual, incline where you're going to be able to ease in, or if it's just going to be like a, 20-foot drop. And I think it all depends maybe on the depth of that person's natural gifts. I do try. Now, I will say my book has a lot of visualizations. And I know sometimes I'm a big believer that our minds are powerful. There's so much that we do not tap. And meditation and visualization is a very big part of, it can be a very big part of unlocking your gifts. There's a lot of different ways to go about things. But I do believe that the book has a lot of, the meditations are meant to build on each other. The exercises are meant to build on each other. So technically you could back out at any minute, but as I'm sure you know pretty well, that when you start poking the bear and asking for engagement, you're generally going to get some kind of reaction, and it might not look the way that you expect it to. And I think that that's one of the things that surprises a lot of people is, well, I want to have these experiences. I was just teaching a class on seances last night, and we were talking about how when you can't just say, well, I want to hold a seance and I want it to be this exact way, and I want it to be done at this exact time. When we are playing around with things that we can't necessarily see, don't fully understand, and especially when you're new at it, you have to have some wiggle room that things might look a little different than you want it to.
Yeah.
And that's part of both the fun and also part of the price that we pay doing this work.
That's very true. Very true. One of the things I find refreshing right at the beginning of your book, you address some interesting topics. And one of the things that you address is the spirits of the dead right away. And you talk about what happens when we die. And you talk about addressing the dead. And especially earthbound spirits. And what I find interesting and refreshing about how you address the earthbound spirits and talking to these earthbound spirits. A lot of people I think, attack it with a grandiose, especially paranormal investigators, attack it with a grandiose attitude. Like, I'm going to grab a hold of Jenny, this ghost, and I'm just going to take Jenny to the light, and she'll see my point of view, and I'm going to rescue her. She's going to see my point of view. Sterling, I am going to help this woman. Why am I in the wrong when I'm going to take Jenny by the hand and throw her in the light? And by gosh, I'm the hero of the day.
Well, did you talk to Jenny? Did you ask her maybe if she's got a reason for being here? Is there a bigger purpose? I mean, here's the thing about spirits of the dead is that at a certain point, we're going to find out what happens at a base level. Although I do wonder if we get to know the full story right away. Maybe we never get to know the full story. The one thing I'm pretty certain of is that I don't believe that it's lights out when we die, based on what I've experienced and seen. But, I mean, Jenny might need somebody to hold her hand and show her the light. And that's something I do talk about a little bit towards the end of the book around, like, treating spirits as sovereign beings. And at the same time, we also need to maybe have a conversation with Jenny. Is there something that you need? If Jenny's not bothering anyone, now if Jenny is, and Jenny's going and bugging the kids while they're trying to sleep and causing shenanigans in the home and making folks uncomfortable, Jenny needs some boundaries. And there needs to be a conversation of, Jenny, you can't be acting like this in the home. And if you continue to act like that, there's ways that we can evict you, whether that's helping you to move on to what's next. But I don't really have a lot of patience just in my own personal practice for kind of what I call savior BS. And to each their own. But I also find, too, that when you try to force the hand, I see this a lot with like folks maybe from kind of more the new age generation, where like I will close all the portals and I will cleanse this home. I have seen a lot of folks where they come in making big old promises and they can maybe quiet down things for a while, but then it comes roaring back. And, my approach is a little bit more like, let's take a beat, let's have some conversations, let's set some ground rules, and let's take our time. That approach doesn't work for everyone. So hopefully that answers your question.
It does. And one of the other things I found refreshing, too, that you mentioned in the book is that sometimes we do have to make deals with these spirits. Sometimes you do have to talk to these spirits and say, hey, you know what? We kind of have to live in the same space here. And especially when they're not malevolent spirits. Sometimes they're spirits that are confused. And you bring up an example in the book of a spirit that showed up at the house that I believe she had Alzheimer's, if I remember right, and didn't realize that she was returning home and that she was passed away, that she was even dead. And once there was, and you can finish the story if you'd like. Go ahead and kind of connect that for the listeners so that they understand. Sometimes when you're investigating or sometimes when you're making communication with a spirit, you really don't know what the story is and why a spirit may be frustrated.
So this was a place that, and I had done a little bit of like both spirit communication and also because I kept it was confusing and it didn't make sense, but there was like stuff that was going on in the middle of the night. There were, this was somewhere that I lived. And so there were like electronics that were going off in the middle of the night. And I just wasn't getting anywhere with my psychic senses. So that's when I bring out some of my gadgets and my tools. And I remember doing this like little spirit box session. And I remember just asking, it was either, do you know that you're dead or do you need help? I might have asked both. And it was a no and yes. And I remember this was me not doing my job great at the time, because sometimes when you're like trying to address these things in your own home, it's harder, right? Because you're just like there all the time and it's more overwhelming and you're close to it. And I remember ending that session. And then like a day later, I realized, Sterling, this person told you they didn't know that they were dead and that they wanted help. And so go back in, do the thing. And I connected with this woman and it was like, oh my gosh, you're just confused. And there is a process it has been my experience that most of the time when spirits want to move on, the way forward is like right there. All you need to do is maybe give a slight prompt of, is there someone that preceded you in death? Yes, it was her husband. Would you like to, and her husband and her parents, would you like to see them again? Oh my gosh, yes. Can you see, and the way that I was taught is look above your head and you kind of create this image, look above your head. There's a light there. You can see your loved ones there. There's a few more steps involved. And all of a sudden it's like, holy smokes, that was right in front of me and I didn't realize it. She was gone very quickly and our house was peaceful after that. And yeah, sometimes the things that seem scary and spooky and ooky, if you take the time to just listen and talk, it's often very different. But some folks don't want to go that route. I had
a listener send me an email, and I want to get your perspective on it before I answer that email, because I don't want to be the authority here, but I'll ask you this question. And he had asked me, well, Tim, why would a ghost haunt a funeral home? That would be a place where a dead body would go, but not necessarily where a spirit would go. Now, I know what Marianne Winkowski told me years ago.
Yeah.
And what I could tell you what she said, but I want your answer first, and then I'll tell you what she said.
Did this person say, do they know who it is that haunts the funeral home, or do they just know that it is a spirit in a funeral home?
I can give you the example of, I don't want to, how should I put this?
You don't want to spoil
Sterling?
it.
Yeah, I don't want to tamper with the witness. I'll put it that way.
No, that's okay. So my thought would be that there's a few different possibilities. One, it could be maybe someone who they're floating along. They've passed and they realize all their friends and family are going to this place and they see themselves there. And maybe they get a little, they get discombobulated and they're staying there and they're maybe confused, shocked. Maybe there's some just, trauma from going through, knowing, suddenly realizing, holy cow, I'm dead, but I'm not ready to make terms with this, not willing to maybe look around to see if there's any guides or anyone willing to talk to me about this. It could be something like that. It could be someone who worked at that funeral home. Maybe they loved their job. Maybe that was something that they love to do, and they want to make sure that, whoever's running it now is keeping the place up to snuff. And I guess the thing is that people are, because spirits of the human dead, they're still people. Mm-hmm. And, yes, we have the opportunity, I believe, to evolve and progress and all of that. And at the same time, we are very bizarre creatures in our motivations and the things that we do. So there could be a very confusing and very human reason that somebody is sticking around. So how about that for an answer/non-answer?
That's pretty good. I'll tell you what Marianne Winkowski told us years ago.
Okay.
Marianne Winkowski was the motivation behind the Ghost Whisperer TV show. She was the real life Ghost Whisperer.
Yeah.
What she told us years ago was this, that when you die, you stay around, even if your motivation is to move on to the light, eventually, you stay around for the first few days after you die.
Absolutely.
And that universal light you're talking about that's above your head or wherever it is also at your funeral or in funeral homes. Oh. Okay. So you show up to your funeral. You show up to the funeral home. You want to see who's there. You want to see all the people who show up. You want to see the people dressed up. You want to see, who's driving what car. You want to see, we're
nosy Nellies, even if whether we're dead or we're alive.
That's right. You want to see how they prepare your body. You want to see we're nosy Nellies. We want to see everything. So, so to answer, and it's the listener's name is Charlie. I won't give away anything more than the answer. And this is just a shout out to Charlie. Sometimes I like to shout out people who
shout out Charlie.
Yeah, that's right. So to answer Charlie's question, and I'll answer him privately as well. To answer Charlie's question via Marianne, why are funeral homes haunted? Well, sometimes people don't move on from the fact that they were at that funeral home, or it could be, as Sterling put it so brilliantly, maybe they worked at that funeral home. Maybe they did process the dead and they're still there. But a lot of times people go to that. They know that there's a universal light at different points on the earth. One of those universal points happens to be at a funeral home. You can always go to a funeral home and there's that universal point of light there that you can step into and cross over. It's always there. You'll always find the light at a funeral home. So
that's so interesting. Well, there's, there's prayer there. There's, you hear people calling your name and oh, that's cool. I love that.
Yeah. So that was one of the things I learned, 2007, I think that was a long time ago. But yeah, that was just one of those interesting things you went, interesting. So
solid.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, kind of what happens when we die was one of those things in the book that I found absolutely fascinating, and dealing with earthbound spirits. The other thing I found interesting too, that you bring up in the book that I don't hear a lot from mediums and from psychics, which absolutely bowled me over, was the topic of, does hell exist and demons? I found it refreshing that you actually brought up demons and hell. Thank you. Can I just say thank you?
You are welcome. These are the things that I think about all the time. I was a weird kid turned into a weird adult. So thank you.
Tell our audience, first of all, does hell exist?
Well, I don't know. None of us can know. no one can say with authority whether or not hell exists. And it has not been something that I have seen. I have not seen anything that necessarily looks like the kind of the classic fire and brimstone place. And at the same time, I think that there is accountability. And that's been one of the things that I see is, and as you were talking about your, Marianne said that there's that period of time that people stick around right after they pass. There almost seems to be like, you go and you check on the people that you loved the most, or, and even if it's maybe something I want to go check in on my office and see if my office is going to be okay. It could be whatever it is that was important to you in life. And there seems to be this process of having to be accountable for the ways that you impacted others, both positively and negatively. And it has been my experience that there are some really nasty spirits that stick around where they are still human. So they are relatively easy to deal with, but they just would rather run forever than deal with that accountability. And it's like they keep getting farther and farther away from who their soul's purpose, and they just get nastier, and they're kind of more that like low level, I think I call them in the book low level beings, or like that low level trickster energy. And then hell, in the way that we've been told, I have not seen anything that exists in that way. And yet I have experienced what I would call malevolent beings that have never been, that don't seem like they've ever been human, and they've got to come from somewhere.
Right.
But so, yeah, it's a tricky thing where I do believe evil exists. I believe bad people have to deal with their stuff. But yeah, I have not yet seen any fire and brimstone. And I hope I don't. Hope I never do.
You do bring up a story in the book about a woman by the name of Sarah. And have said that you've dealt with something that looks like, and I'll say in quotes, air quotes, people can't see it. It's a podcast, an audio podcast, that resembles what you call a demon.
Yeah.
So you do use the word demon, but not in a classic, big red monster with horns or anything like that, but something that feels, for lack of a better term, icky. Right? Something that has a negative energy, something that was hard to deal with. That's not human.
It sure was.
It's inhuman. Yeah. Right. But again, we don't know where it returns to. You know that you had to banish it, and it came back, and it did. You had to continue to banish it.
Well, at a certain point, I was able to remove this thing, and I will say for Sarah, her name was changed for privacy, and she gave full permission and consent, reviewed this. I mean, this was something that she had been dealing with for close to 20 years. And it was kind of like a dual haunting where she had an attachment of a human woman, this person she'd been having dreams of for a very long time. And again, and this is more from my folk magic studies, I was taught a way of, removing spirit attachments. And as I began to look into what was happening with this spirit of a human woman, it was very clear that there was another spirit that I don't even, I don't even like referencing it to directly because it's not fully gone. But it was icky. It was gross. It only wanted destruction. It was like kind of feeding off of this person. And it was using this spirit of a human woman to harass this living woman. And the biggest issue was getting both of these spirits separated from Sarah, but then also giving her the tools, because it turned out she's psychically and mediumistically gifted as well. She'd had a run-in in another country long ago with something that she believed to be demonic. So that might have even been the origin of where this thing started, coming around with her. And it came back twice. And both times she recognized what was happening and she sent it away. And that's like the biggest thing, is that like, if you have these gifts, it's really important to know how to take care of yourself. Take care of your own self. And I'm so proud of her, because we still keep in touch, not as closely as we used to, but it seems like she's thriving, and that's awesome.
That's very awesome. Yep. Very much so indeed. I tell you what, Sterling, we're going to take a break here. When we come back, I want to talk about ancestry, and I want to talk about past lives. When we come back, I want to dig into that. And I also wanted to talk about other types of spirits We'll even get into aliens. We'll get into cryptids, and we'll get into different types of spirits you can make contact with. We'll get into the fun side of spiritualism and mediumship. The book is Talking to Spirits, a modern medium's practical advice for spirit communications. It's put up by Llewellyn Press. We have a link in the description of this program. Go ahead and click on it during the break and get yourself a copy. I highly recommend the book, even if you're just kind of looking into mediumistic tendencies. If you're curious about what it takes to become a medium, it's very detailed, folks, as to how you kind of dip your toe into the water, or if you're just kind of curious as to what it takes to become a medium. By all means, pick up the book, take a look at it. It doesn't hurt just to read the book and find out what it takes. And it's a nice, easy read. It's a very informative book for sure. And it's I tell you, folks, there's stuff in here that I've read that in 17 years of doing this show were brand new to me, absolutely brand new to me. So I was very impressed by what I read. Again, Talking to Spirits, a modern medium's practical advice for spirit communication is the name of the book. Sterling Moon is our guest. When we come back, we'll talk about how to get in touch with your ancestors. It's coming up next on the Best in Paranormal Podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the Best in Paranormal Podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. Our guest is Sterling Moon. The book is Talking to Spirits, a modern medium's practical advice for spiritual communication. And when we left you last, we were teasing a little bit about getting in touch with your ancestors and talking about ancestry in general. A lot of us talk about past lives or thinking we might have lived past lives or even wanting to kind of follow that ancestry or knowing what's in our past. Ancestry.com is kind of the thing now, Sterling. It's kind of, getting to know our past and figuring out what's in our past. I know my aunt is the genealogist in her family, and boy, has she done a lot of work in the last decade or two. She's gone way back. We can trace our family lines to, there's one section of our family line we can trace back to ancient Rome.
That's cool.
There's another section that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. And it's kind of interesting to see on paper where things go. Mm-hmm. But to be able to psychically go back and touch it, so to speak, or communicate with it would be another thing. Mm-hmm. To be able to do that. And in reading your book, to see that you can do that, that you can actually do that you can get that psychically was not only refreshing, but exciting. Explain a little bit to our audience how you go about that. How can I start to do that? And I read something that says, and I teased this yesterday on the show, an ancestry altar.
An ancestor altar. Yeah.
Yeah. What's this all about? Tell our audience a little bit about what I'm teasing here.
You bet. So this is something, ancestor veneration is really common in most folk magic practices. And that's the idea that if we go back to, we all have lineages of origin. And some of us are very, like myself, I'm very, very mixed. But we can, trace things back. And if we look to kind of like those cultural roots, oftentimes there was some kind of connection with honoring those who have come before you. And so a foundational piece of many folk magic practices is having an altar in your space, in your home, the heart of your home. Don't have your ancestor altar in your bedroom, folks, because you don't want your family to be part of your intimate moments.
No.
So, that's one of the things that's, your elders will always teach you that one first and foremost. So in my home, our ancestor altar is just, right by our couches in our living room. Mm-hmm. So they're kind of part of the action. And so you don't have to have anything fancy, just a simple shelf will do. For people who are really challenged with space, you can even have your ancestor altar in like a shoebox where you bring it out when you want to talk to them and you place it somewhere respectful in a closet, perhaps, when you're done. But the whole idea is that, if you want to start talking to spirits, the safest spirits to communicate with. And the reason that we often work with them in magic is that, they have a vested interest in us as their descendants being successful, in thriving, in breaking, unhelpful patterns. And they're also the ones who are just, they're just a little bit closer than other spirits. They want to be supportive and helpful for us. Now, one of the things that always comes up is, well, I had ancestors that were real stinkers. And we all have problematic ancestors. Mm-hmm. And here's the thing is that you can talk with them about, here's how we don't do things anymore. And, and again, this is in magical traditions. You can also give those ancestors jobs to kind of help make the harms right. You can do things like doing good, and you don't tell anyone about this, but you do good and you do it in their name of like, I'm doing this to repair harm that I know you have caused. There's some, ways that you can try to make things right. But it's really about just all you need for your ancestor altar. It's very, very simplest, is a glass of water. Water is just considered to be a conduit, and it's also a respectful, refreshment to give. A candle that is dedicated to your ancestors. The candle lights their way. The fire helps to bring some energy. You can bring in all the 4 elements if you want. You can use incense to represent air. You can use either salt or dirt to represent the earth, or rocks or something like that. And it's helpful to have some pictures. Only have pictures of people who are deceased, because you don't want to be calling anybody over to the other side prematurely. And, you can get it as elaborate as you want. There's some people that they will have glasses of water and candles for like every branch of their family that they're aware of. They'll write out the surnames of their families. I mean, you can go wild with this, but it's also about just showing the connection is strengthened the more you work by, you go and I talk to my ancestors every single day. I bring them coffee. We just had Easter. We just celebrated Easter. I made sure that they had a plate of food. I made sure that some of them were clamoring that they wanted wine. So it's like, I bring them a little glass of wine, and you keep it clean. You keep it tidy. You spend time, you listen to them, you ask them for help. And then you notice what happens. You practice and you use your subtle listening skills, and you have to take the time to observe the changes and the subtle things. It's quite fun. It's quite fun.
Now, you do point out, and there is it's kind of a helpful tip. I do have a chapter of my family that has problems with alcoholism. If you do, if you do have some alcohol or drug issues in your family, you don't want to offer up things like tobacco or alcohol or things like that. You don't want to offer up negative things that could trigger things.
Yeah. And my father died of alcoholism when he was 48. And so I tend to keep alcohol away from his little quadrant of the altar. Mm-hmm. Now, there are some folks that believe that you want to give your family vices, even if maybe there were struggles and things like that. And the idea is that you want to keep your ancestors well fed, so they don't go seeking that elsewhere. And seeking it elsewhere also opens you up to maybe not being under their protection as much. There's some theories and some philosophy, kind of folklore around that. But yeah, I'm of the belief that no, this is what killed you. Yeah. You're not going to get whiskey in my house.
Right.
And that's just how it is, folks. You can have coffee and sugar, because I know you liked those things too.
Yeah. I would think too that aren't you putting out negative energy if you put out the thing that killed them? Isn't that a negative energy experience rather than a positive energy experience?
That's a good way of thinking about that. I mean, it doesn't feel great to me. And so there are some families where, like, for example, my husband's family is Swedish. Mm-hmm. And when midsummer comes around, they just got to have vodka and strawberries. Like, I just know that that's something that they need to have. And everybody's separated enough, though, that that feels like a celebratory thing for them. Okay. But yeah, it would be a dark and depressing little bit of energy to be given my father whiskey, or anyone from that side of the family whiskey. And it's all kind of, this is the beauty of it, is like finding what works for you and your family and what feels good and what feels right. And I love, there's this quote from Michelle Belanger in one of her classes that she offers. I think it's like an energy class, where she talks about how you can read like all the books, you can take all the classes, but at the end of the day, you still have to just take all that information in order to figure out the roadmap to you. And I just love that because, you got to find what works, what works for you. And there's lots of people who tell you you're doing it right, you're doing it wrong, but you just got to kind of follow your own inner compass at a certain point.
That's true. That's very true. I want to get into other spirits that may not seem like they're human.
Yeah.
Because I would suppose as a psychic or a medium, you don't really have a choice as to what you run into at times.
True.
Let's start out slow. Are spirit guides human?
I think so. And there's differing opinions about this. Now, in my experience, it feels like, so one of the books that I always recommend to everyone, and if there's any of like my former students who are former or current students listening to this, she's like, oh, they're going, oh boy, she's going to talk about that book again. There's a book called Journey of Souls by Dr. Michael Newton that was huge for me. I read it in 2014, and he talks about the idea that if we have past lives, that we can live multiple lifetimes, where do we go in between there? And that is where we have like almost ascended masters or these guides that greet us and they help us to remember all the lessons. It has been my experience that those, I used the exercises in Dr. Michael's book, Dr. Newton's books to connect with my guides for the first time. They definitely don't. They feel better than human. Okay. Way better than human. But I've also talked with people who they really feel like their spirit guides are ancestors or people that maybe they've lived past lives with who are still on the other side. And it's not for me to say that's right or wrong if you feel like but I do feel like there's beings that are better than human that seem to be available to us if we are open to that.
You talk about in the book as well, being able to call upon angels to help you at times.
Oh, yeah. So I'm real lucky in that my family is Episcopal. Well, she always says it's like Catholic without the Latin. But I just never really felt great going to church. I have this really clear memory of like falling asleep. I was at church with my grandma. I was probably around 6 or 7 and I fell asleep and I fell off a pew and I told my grandma, I don't like going there. And I think I embarrassed her. So she's like, you don't have to go anymore. And that was that. I would go with my mom sometimes for like holidays just to like help her feel good. But I really got to figure things out on my own. And so when I first started working with archangels, I'm kind of like freshly identifying as a witch. And I'm like, gosh, I know that I'm supposed to be like a witch, but I really like these angels. And boy, they feel so supportive. And again, in folk traditions, you find a lot of working with saints. We work with the angels. We work with all, different deities. And it just, angels are great because they don't ask a lot in return. The trick is you got to ask them in. And so I've definitely worked with people who they will be like, oh gosh, my life is falling apart, but Archangel Michael walks with you. And I'm like, I don't think that's Archangel Michael. Like if he just came in and your life is falling apart, I think that's somebody probably wearing the mask of Archangel Michael. You might want to rethink this, but you do you. I love the angels.
So let me ask you this question. You brought up something interesting. Okay, so what exactly can mask itself as an angel? Is that something demonic?
Well, anything could. You see, you could have some nasty, and it's part about you have to be discerning. Okay. So I could come into this interview wearing a little tacky tinsel halo and some, angel wings and saying, Tim, I am Archangel Uriel. And if you were someone who maybe you really weren't expecting that, which I'm guessing you wouldn't have been. No. Or maybe you are like, we can fake our way. I mean, think of like catfishing, for crying out loud. This is like the ultimate catfish is like coming in and saying like, no, I'm an angel. And I think that anything that has malicious intent and that is cunning and crafty, I do think that those types of spirits, they also prey on people who are exceptionally vulnerable. People maybe who are going through acute crisis, who have deep unaddressed trauma, who, maybe they could be, maybe even have like active addictions and they're literally not thinking clearly. those kinds of spirits are going to prey on the vulnerable. And yeah, they're going to wear the mask and catfish.
So how do you get them to prove that they're actually an angel?
Well, some of it is, and this is very specific to me. Like, and I will say, like, number one, if you feel like you've got an angel that's walking with you and advising you, but everything that you do that's, every time you follow that advice turns to garbage, that's a sign maybe that this being is not looking out for you. For me, it's, something that I've evolved. I have pretty strong clairvoyance. And so for me, I'm able to mentally tap into beings pretty easily and like see them. And for me, it's kind of being able to like really tap into them and walk around. I mean, it sounds really cheesy, but like walk around them 360 because they usually can't hold the image perfectly. There's always a tell. And even sometimes the tell is just that like knowing of something ain't right here. Something is not right here. And gut instinct comes in with this. Gut instinct and also just looking at the totality of the circumstances is how I approach it.
Have you ever had someone from the church challenge you that an angel would work with a witch?
No. And I would, there's part of me, gosh, the Jehovah's Witnesses used to come to my house all the time. And I tried really hard the last time they came to I wanted to have this like earnest conversation with them. Yeah. And they were asking, well, do you follow the Bible? And we're like, no, we don't. And I'm like getting closer to them. And there's this little woman, she was so cute. She looked a lot like the woman in The Exorcist. And she just, 16 candles and her eyes just kept getting bigger and bigger. And she kept backing farther and farther away. And they don't come to our house anymore. And I'm really disappointed because I wanted to try to have like a genuine conversation, but no go.
No. So. Interesting.
Yeah. So not yet. I wouldn't surprise me if that came up at a certain point. But my counter argument would be that, the God that I believe in loves everyone. And I think the angels are, if they are connected to that, why wouldn't they love me?
Right. Yeah. Oh, that would be my opinion as well. That, everyone's created by the same God. Why wouldn't they serve the same humanity?
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully I don't have to defend that hypothesis anytime soon. It sounds exhausting.
It does. Well, let's move on to a different spirit. I once had someone on the show who said that they had for lack of a better term, a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch as a spirit guide.
Ooh,
yeah, I know.
That's a fun one.
That is a fun one. So I would ask you in return, Sterling, have you ever had a spirit guide that was a cryptid?
Well, no. And although I will say my family is really obsessed with, so my mom and my stepdad has lived and worked in 72 different countries. He used to do anti-fraud, like financial consulting, and for the World Health Organization and World Bank. And he was just obsessed with all of the different like monsters of the world. And so he gets together with my mom, who's an artist. And so they have, the chupacabra has become like our family mascot. My mom has loads of like really cute chupacabra art. They designed this little stuffed animal. There's chupacabras everywhere in my family's home. It's a fun time. So other than having a chupacabra as a family mascot, we haven't had a cryptid as a spirit guide, but I will tell you, I have lived somewhere where there was something that felt cryptid-like, and I don't even know what I would call it. Several of our family members had seen it, myself included. It's big, it's black, it's very large, and almost looks like it's puffy, but it's kind of puffy. Like it's hard to really make out. It has red eyes, and it's not mean, it's wild.
Okay.
But it lived in a part of the basement and what felt like the backyard. And so that was a really interesting experience of living somewhere where it was like, there is something that doesn't feel human here. Quite a few people have seen it, but it also doesn't feel malevolent. And like anything, I don't know if it would even be possible to clear out, but probably it felt more cryptid-like than anything else. So that's a don't know if I've ever told that story out loud before outside of our family.
Okay. For lack of a better term, what does a cryptid spirit feel like psychically? Does it feel different than a human?
it feels wild. I mean, it feels animal, like an animal, but not in like a bad way, but just something where you need, for me, with this particular spirit, it's like there's no shared understanding of words or emotions. If I went into this particular part of the house without announcing myself, I would often feel like I was being rushed, and I would get this kind of an image of like a dark shadow coming up on me, defending its space.
Okay.
And not in a way that I felt like I was going to be under attack, but it was just kind of this like, okay. Like when you have, it's just like I'm in the presence of a wild animal and that I just need to tread carefully around. But that if I am polite and respectful and just thoughtful, this being probably actually has some benefit for the area. I think probably it feels protective of the home, feels protective of the land. And that's a good thing.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. That's a weird one, I know.
No, not weird at all. It's just very interesting. Because you have those camps when it comes to different cryptids, especially when it comes to Bigfoot or Sasquatch, that they don't know whether to believe if it's an ape type creature or if it's a transdimensional creature, something that may be alien in nature. And you have those two camps that argue back and forth. And they don't know what to believe. We've also had guests on the show that say, where there are Bigfoot or Sasquatch, you also see aliens. Where there's one, there's the other. Yeah.
And I guess is it like out of the realm of possibility that it couldn't be both and maybe also something else? I mean, that's the thing too, where we don't know what we don't know. And that's part of the fun of it too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of it, like time and energy that's spent on arguing about things that we can't prove. And man, I have not my circus, not my monkeys, not my not my circus, not my Bigfoot on that one. So
speaking of aliens, have you had contact with or felt aliens in a psychic presence?
So I am disappointed to say that I have not. Okay. My mom has. She's a funny one. So she's also very gifted, but her gifts show up differently. And she'll say, "Oh, I don't really have any good stories." But if you get her talking when she's cooking, suddenly she'll just start like going back, 40, 50 years. And she has had some sightings. So we lived in rural New Mexico at one point, and later we lived in rural Wyoming. And I remember it was probably in like the late 80s or early 90s. She had seen a series of crafts and, just went out and watched them for a while, called the radio to, trying to figure out, is like anybody else reporting this? Because this was pre-internet. And then we also lived in a place called Rogers Canyon, which is north of Laramie, Wyoming. And that is an area that has been known to have a lot of sightings. And, there's some contactees and abductees from that area as well. Part of me is kind of relieved that's not an experience that I've had. And then there's also part of me that's mildly disappointed because I'm like, man, but careful what you wish for.
Yes.
This is how I'm thinking of this.
Yeah. I've throughout the years, I've talked to quite a few people who have had abduction experiences and they're not pleasant. And at this point, I'll refer people to a group called Opus that we've had on the show here before. And Opus OPUS is probably one of the best groups out there that can help people who have had abduction experiences or have had, we'll say negative experiences with aliens. That's one of the best groups out there that can help you deal with that trauma.
And I think it's so cool that there's like, at least people are talking enough that there are reputable places that you can get help because it sounds pretty traumatizing in many instances. But the thing that I find interesting is just, again, like when you start, and I always think of it as like most people are fairly open to the idea of ghosts, so spirits of the human dead. But then once you start just like unraveling all the other possibilities, I mean, you really can just open Pandora's box of like, well, why not this? And especially when you start to look at places that do have a lot of, UFO sightings and contactee experiences, abductees experiences, there's also like classic paranormal stuff going on too.
Yeah.
And so it's worth considering. that maybe things are all part and parcel of the same multiverse or whatever.
Up until a couple of years ago, I used to discount fairies in the worst way. I mean, I used to think that was one of the most ridiculous things ever, Sterling. I got turned around real quick. And actually, it was Rosemary Ellen Guiley who turned me around real quick on that. But yeah, I used to kind of scoff at it, and she sat me down and she said, "No, Tim, here's why." And we had a really long discussion about it. And then I started to kind of see why I shouldn't scoff at it. You know, it's actually one of the oldest phenomena that's out there. And I got turned around on it pretty quickly, but I still have a more skepticism about fairy folk than I do than anything else. I have to ask you though, Sterling, when it comes to fairy folk, what is it about it that you find so believable?
Well, so I didn't used to. So I'm with you. And then I lived in a really haunted house that was the scariest place I've ever lived. And we did have what appeared to be one spirit of a human dead person that would come and go. But then we had something that didn't feel human in the basement. I brought in a medium from a local metaphysical shop, and she was just like, "You got a trapped earth spirit down there." I said, "What does that even mean?" She's like, "It's kind of like a troll." I'm like, "Okay, so you're telling me I have a troll in my basement?" And I still carry regret, because she gave me some tips about, you know, some steps I could take to make this being more happy. And I thought it was just so ridiculous. And we were close to like moving, and we bought our first house. I still carry regret that I didn't do that, because I feel sad for whatever was there. But I mean, bug infestation, broken pipes, things flying off of shelves, all contained to the basement, very, you know, uncomfortable feelings. And, you know, and also too, just I've had the privilege of living in rural areas, and there are when you are in a fairly untouched natural space, you can feel the power of it. Yeah. And then you start to think of how nature is all around us. Our homes are built on nature. Nature has been decimated and touched irreparably in order to make way for the ways that we live. And it's worth considering, you know, do we have, and then there's just things that sometimes I've seen some things that just defy explanation, and they definitely aren't human. They're not demonic, and they feel like they are something of the earth. And so I didn't used to think that they were believable. I do also think that studying with, you know, a Swedish folk magic practitioner for, you know, a couple of years, and they're, you know, they've got a lot of lore there. He lives in a rural area that's part of these deep woods with big history. And he's like, you know, it's not all cute and fun. And, you know, he's like, there's some scary stuff out there, and you got to really tread lightly. So, yeah, it took me a while to come around on that one too. But I often find that when you have places that have a lot of like classic poltergeist activity, it is worth ferreting out if there might be some elemental things going on, because these are spirits that can literally feed on the elements of the earth, and they have a power source that human dead spirits, you know, might not have. So that has been my experience, at least.
Yeah, and you do go into the elementals and elemental spirits as well in this book, and it's quite interesting that one of the I don't know if you've been to the Palmer House here in Minnesota in Sauk Center, but supposedly the spirit that's in the basement is an elemental.
Oh boy!
Yeah, and it's a little nasty. It's not exactly a very friendly spirit, but you do have to respect it when you're down there. But it's quite powerful.
They tend to just want to be left alone. They want to be treated with respect. Don't take anything from them. Don't make deals with them. Don't try to get too chummy. And the way that I think of it, I got into a little bit of a tiff with a woman at a event at a public library where she had studied fairy lore, and there are theories that fairies were human. They were part of like a human race, ancient. I'm like, cool, you know, that's been my experience, but it has been my experience that we are not of the same nature. And so we just have to tread rather carefully because we're different.
Yeah, exactly. As we start to wrap things up here a little bit, Sterling, I want to ask you a few questions when it comes to people who will pick up your book here and say to themselves, well, okay, I get wanting to get into this here, Sterling, but I have a few issues with even trying to start this. One of them is I have a hard time with meditation. I can't get myself into that space. How would you tell somebody who says, well, I have a hard time with meditation, I don't know if I can get into that space? How do you get them to settle down and get into that space in the first place?
Some of it is discipline. I mean, just cold, hard discipline. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that you can do to get yourself into that zone is, I find that a lot of people who are super fidgety, or maybe who like have ADHD, who, you know, their minds are always going a million miles a minute. Because I have some students who are, you know, who fall into this camp. I find it helpful, like, get a workout in, or like move your body until you are, you know, maybe you're kind of like in a little bit of that zone. If you have an exercise bike in your home, do the meditation literally while you're on the bike. Or if you can safely go for a walk somewhere, maybe on a path where you can kind of zone out, practicing with like guided audio meditations while you are walking. That's like, sometimes keeping your body movement or keeping your body moving can be a way to help you get into the zone. I've even had students who are like, you know, I've advised them, I'm like, do push-ups, like literally start by like listening to an audio meditation while you're doing push-ups to help you like get into the zone. Some of it too is just, I will say some of the meditations that I offer are easier for people with wandering minds, because sometimes the hardest meditations are the ones where you're trying to like have the void. Like, I want to have my mind go blank. Mm-hmm. These are more, I like to call them traveling meditations, where you are creating mind rooms that you go into. They are active. You may also find it helpful to maybe you record yourself, you know, reading the meditation, so then you can listen to your own self. Mm-hmm. So those are just a few tweaks, and it can be a struggle, but the more you are disciplined and you come back to it, the easier it will get. It just takes practice.
Okay. And do you find that the repetition of doing these active meditations will eventually open up psychic ability? Do you feel like everybody can do that? Or is there going to be the occasional person who just can't get there?
There are some people that might not be able to get there. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's conditioning. You know, they just have been, I sometimes have folks where they have just been so committed to a skeptical mindset for so long that it's really hard for them to, they might be having psychic and mediumistic experiences, but they can't let themselves trust it. Because there is like that fine line of like knowing how to check yourself and be like, I heard a door slam. And it's like, yeah, that was the dog. You know, you do need to be able to like check yourself. And at the same time, you also need to like give yourself permission to believe that what you're experiencing is real and valid. I do think sometimes there are people with layers of trauma. I've definitely worked with some parents who've lost children, which I don't think there's any grief quite like that, where that layer of, I was just talking with a medium named Barb Crowley recently, and she was talking about how when people are really in acute grief, it's like a huge cloud that spirits just can't permeate. And so that's why you have to trust, like the messages will come from, as she put it, the weird people, like the grocery store clerk who's like, I had this dream about your husband, and this is what he wanted me to tell you. And so, yeah, like for people who are in acute grief, it may be harder for you. Diehard skeptics, you may have a lot of unlearning to do. And there's just some folks that, you know, they might struggle with it, and that's just is how it is. Most people, though, can at least have some progress.
Okay. All right. Any last thoughts today about what you might want to tell people about what it takes to be psychic? Is there something that somebody may need to unlearn specifically in order to reach a psychic mind?
I think it's just be willing to have fun. I think that sometimes we think that spiritual stuff, it's so serious. It's all so serious. And the thing is that this actually can be very playful and fun, and it makes the world a lot shinier and more interesting. The spooky and ooky and all of that can happen, but I find that the more lighthearted you come into it, you are greeted with that energy. And it can just make your world so much more delightful. And the other thing I will say is, so that's for folks who maybe want to have these experiences. And for folks who are overwhelmed by the experiences that they're already having, like you don't have to do this alone. There's information out there, and just trying to shut down your gifts often doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And there are ways that you can turn these and take these from feeling like a liability to actually feeling like gifts.
Okay. That's a great note to end on. Again, the book is called Talking to Spirits, A Modern Medium's Practical Advice for Spirit Communication. Sterling Moon is the author. It's available on Llewellyn Press. We have a link in the description of this program for you to go ahead and get it. I highly encourage you to get the book. Again, there's stuff in here that I learned that in 17 years I'd never known. So
woohoo!
I want you to, I highly encourage you to go out and get the book, even if you just kind of thumb through it and pick up some things that you may just put in your toolkit. That's a good way of going about it. Sterling, I want to thank you so much for joining the program today and teaching us a little something about something.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. This was super fun. Thank
you so much. Appreciate you being on the program. Folks, I want to thank you so much for joining us this week for another great week of Darkness Radio. I want to remind you to do a little something for your neighbors this weekend. Leave the world a little bit better than what you found it. Although we are coming into spring, I can't believe we had snow on the ground and it was 70 degrees this weekend, 70, 80 degrees this weekend. That's unusual and supernatural in itself. We're coming into spring and people do need help with different things around the house. Make sure you volunteer and help somebody out there, whether it be an elderly neighbor or somebody who might be physically disabled that needs some help around the house. Leave it a little bit better than what you found it this weekend. Do a little something for a neighbor and, again, just help somebody out there who needs some help. But have some fun this weekend as well. Enjoy your weekend. We'll see you next week for another great week in the best in paranormal podcasting. This has been Darkness Radio.